Coming up on The World Today. Life returns to normal in Windsor after ceremonies. Powerful tremor kills at least one person in West Mexico. Global COVID-19 caseload tops 609 million, with death toll surpassing 6.5 million as US President Joe Biden says COVID is over. Welcome, everyone, to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. Well, we begin with world leaders who have arrived at the United Nations in New York City as the world body got set to host a week of meetings centered around the General Assembly's annual debate. This year marked a return to in-person congregating after 2 years of virtual and hybrid summits. Among those arriving were Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. The high-level meetings kick off today. Of course, Nigeria's president is also attending. And UN Chief Antonio Guterres today urged rich countries to tax windfall profits of fossil fuel companies and use that money to help countries harmed by the climate crisis and people who are struggling with rising food and energy prices. Addressing world leaders at the 193-member UN General Assembly, the climate activist Secretary General stepped up his attacks on oil and gas companies, which have seen their profits explode by tens of billions of dollars. While Mr. Guterres again pushed developed countries to tax the fossil fuel windfall profits, this time he also used his bully pulpit to spell out where the money should be spent. Britain has passed a 25% windfall tax on oil and gas producers in the North Sea, while US lawmakers have discussed a similar idea, though it faces long odds in Congress.
Now we risk ending up with the United Nations Charter, and the ideals it represents are in jeopardy. We have a duty to act, and yet we are gridlocked in colossal global dysfunction, undermining international law, undermining trust and people's faith in democratic institutions. International relations seem to be moving towards a G2 world. Now we risk ending up with a G-nothing. No cooperation, no dialogue, no collective problem solving. But the reality is that we live in a world where the logic of cooperation and dialogue is the only path forward. No power or group alone can call the shots. No major global challenge can be solved with a coalition of the willing. We need a coalition of the world. Excellencies, there is another battle we must end, our suicidal war against nature. The climate crisis is the defining issue of our time. We see it everywhere. Planet Earth is a victim. The fossil fuel industry is feasting on hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies and windfall profits, while households' budgets shrink and our planet burns. Excellencies, let's tell it like it is. Our world is addicted to fossil fuels, and it's time for an intervention. We need to hold fossil.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres. Meanwhile, earlier, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu exchanged diplomatic pleasantries as they met to outline their agendas ahead of the UN's General Assembly. Mr. Blinken praised Turkey for its role as a NATO ally and noted that Turkey and the US are facing many security challenges. Meanwhile, Mr. Cavusoglu said he was looking forward to discussing the war in Ukraine with Blinken. He also praised Mr. Blinken for bringing together Monday the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan, the first direct talks between the two sides since deadly border clashes early this month.
Lots more on our agenda, but it's always great to see you. Grateful for the work we're doing together as NATO allies and partners. Many security challenges that we're facing together. I want to particularly praise the work that Turkey has done to help establish the rainforest the Black Sea that is allowing desperately needed food to get to people who need it, particularly in the global south, and we'll be working together to extend the mechanism that Turkey and the United Nations put in place to make sure that this could happen. Lots more on our agenda, but it was always great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Secretary Blinken, my dear friend Tony. I'm very happy to see you again. And I agree with you that each time we meet, we discuss many issues, from bilateral to regional issues and global ones. And today I look forward discussing aspects of bilateral relations and good cooperation in many areas, and also the regional issues, the war in Ukraine, and also the situation in South Caucasus. Let me commend your efforts. And yesterday you brought two foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia together, and the situation in Syria and our region as well. And I'm very happy that strategic mechanism have been working very well. And my deputy and my colleagues went to DC for consultations, and I was told that all those meetings and consultations went very well for our discussion today. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary,
Representatives of Turkey and the US on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Let's go over to the United Kingdom a day after the nation stood still and said their final goodbye to UK's longest-serving monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. Flags on British government buildings around the world are flying at full mast once again as a period of national mourning following the Queen's death draws to a close. The Queen was buried in a private ceremony in Windsor Monday evening following a state funeral in London and military procession to Windsor Castle. But the royal family will continue to observe another week in mourning. Senior royals are not expected to carry out any public duties during this time. Flags at royal residences will remain at half-mast until 8 p.m. British Summer Time on September the 27th, the day after their mourning period ends. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace has said royal household staff, representatives of the household on official duties, troops committed to ceremonial duties will also observe the extended mourning period.
Britain and the world paid a final farewell to the nation's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, in a dazzling show of pomp and ceremony yesterday.
In the name of the Holy Spirit, who strengtheneth thee, in communion with the blessed saints.
Queen Elizabeth's coffin was lowered into a vault at Windsor Castle, her final resting place, after a day of inimitable pageantry that drew world leaders to her funeral and huge crowds to the streets to say farewell to the monarch. Canadians also turned out in their hundreds to line downtown streets of the nation's capital to bid a final farewell to Queen Elizabeth II. A military display to mark the passing of the Queen included a 96-gun salute and a parade column through the streets of Ottawa. Royal Canadian Mounted Police led a parade of Canadian Armed Forces personnel towards Christ Church Cathedral, where among the speakers was former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney.
As one who had the privilege of a significant relationship with Her Majesty for many years, I can simply say this. She was extremely intelligent, a woman of impeccable judgment, resolute, selfless, witty, very witty, and kind. The role of the monarchy, and in particular, the irreplaceable role played by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for 70 years, was absolutely indispensable in our country's hugely impressive achievements and contributions to peace and prosperity and stability at home and around the world. May God bless the Queen, and may God save the King.
Before the Queen was laid to rest, people queued round the clock from last Wednesday until 6:30 a.m. yesterday, the day of the Queen's funeral, to see her coffin inside the Westminster Hall. Culture Secretary Michelle Donolan says her department was still crunching the numbers, but believed that around 250,000 people had filed past the hall during her lying-in state. According to her, she did not know the final cost of the state funeral at Westminster Abbey, which entailed a vast security operation for hundreds of foreign dignitaries. But she said the British public would agree that was money well spent. Life in Windsor now begins to return to normal as traffic resumed and barriers on broadcast screens were removed the day after Queen Elizabeth was laid to rest. Some residents who watched the funeral ceremony on their screen have decided to come and pay their own respects in peace and quiet earlier this morning.
We could have come down here because we live 10 minutes away, but we felt it was important for us to come down on a lovely morning like today and walk down the long walk with our own reflections and our own memories of Her Majesty, and to do our thing in our own personal way. And we've done that this morning, and it is quite emotive, I must admit.
It's no different in London, as the street appears to be swept clean after more than 10 days in which reality had been suspended for many across the country.
I think 10 days was a perfect amount for mourning. Any longer, then we wouldn't have a chance to move on as Londoners, and it's a good time to welcome on to the King now. In terms of Prince Charles being the King, I mean, he's a quintessential British gentleman, so what more could you want?
The royal family will observe an extended period of mourning that ends on the 7th day after the funeral. During this time, the royal family will not do any public engagements unless the King gives special permission. They will also continue to wear black attire, and flags at royal residences will continue to fly at half-mast. It's a day after the Queen's funeral, and one thing is different. The country now has a king, King Charles III, and many are now looking forward to the future of Britain's monarchy under him.
We talk about health now, where the World Health Organization has confirmed 609 million. This is over 609 million COVID-19 cases as of Monday, with the death toll topping 6.5 million. According to the latest data, they specifically said the global caseload had numbered over 600 million, including the deaths by the WHO COVID-19 dashboard, while the United States has recorded 95.71 million confirmed cases nationwide, with deaths surpassing 1.05 million. According to the Center for Systems Science and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins University, U.S. COVID-19 testing labs and at-home test manufacturers have been downsizing after government funding cuts and waning demand, despite concerns that the country could face another winter surge in infections. Over in Asia, South Korea reported 19,407 new cases as of midnight Sunday, compared to 24 hours ago, raising the total number of infections to over 24 million. India has reported 4,858 new cases of COVID during the past 24 hours, taking the total tally to over 44 million in the country. And latest, more than 6.5 million people have died since the beginning of the pandemic. The U.S. has, of course, had the highest death toll, followed by India and Brazil. Meanwhile, talking about the United States, President Joe Biden has declared the pandemic over in the U.S., even as the number of Americans who have died from COVID continues to rise. Mr. Biden, in a television interview, said, "We're still doing a lot of work on it, but the pandemic is over." Statistics show that over 400 Americans on average are dying from the virus each day. Top on this, the president, who, when he was speaking, gestured towards a crowd, said that if you notice, no one is wearing masks. He said everybody seems to be in pretty good shape, and he thinks that it is changing. But administration officials told U.S. media that the comments did not signal a change in policy. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now for the latest. Maria, are there plans to lift the ongoing COVID-19 public health emergency?
There are no things at this time. I think that you said it best when you mentioned White House officials not at all saying that they are this at this time. They're really putting forth many vaccination campaigns. The real struggle at this time is to try to convince people to get boosters. We are still seeing that the Omicron variant is still very active in the U.S. But again, the key words that the president stated was the pandemic. And so the question is this going to become a part of life moving forward? And are we still in a pandemic? And I think the White House is trying to figure the politics around that, because obviously when you hear the word pandemic, that does put more resources around it. It does make more of a urgency among Americans around what we see as costing many people their lives, the COVID-19 virus. And so it's going to be a political battle, I think, as you mentioned, coming here as we're looking to get additional funding to have additional vaccine campaigns, to be able to offer vaccines to those who might not have health insurance or access to the ability to be vaccinated. And so at this time, I think the president was really focusing more on the pandemic issue. And so the White House is going to be working hard to ensure that those comments are put into context and that they are relatable and relative for the Republicans specifically that are going to focus in on those words that he released on 60 Minutes on Sunday evening.
And following, his statements, we've heard top Republicans criticize the president's remarks, expressing, and then we have, of course, public health officials who are expressing cautious optimism, but still urging people to be careful. And then Dr. Fauci, who is head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, say that, he did acknowledge that the situation had improved. I mean, how are people, the large number of Americans, how are they interpreting this statement?
Well, many Americans are not wearing masks. I mean, I will say that we have moved a little bit past that. There are still places that have indoor mask mandates. And so you're still seeing that just due to trying to curb the spread. You see pockets of where you kind of see the virus spreading rapidly, but on a whole perspective, I think many Americans do believe that we're heading toward the end of the pandemic. But we are still seeing many individuals contracting the virus every day. The question is, how are the symptoms, and really what is the life expectancy and the potential death toll that could be experienced if we do remove the term pandemic and the health emergency from the equation at this time.
All right, we'll continue to watch this space. We'd like to thank you, Maria Bird, our Washington correspondent, joining us there. Elsewhere, the Taliban and the United States completed a prisoner swap, with Taliban senior member Bashir Nozai being exchanged for a U.S. veteran. Now, after being released, Nozai arrived in Kabul, where the Afghan interim government held a welcome rally for him. Afghanistan's acting foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaq said at the rally that the U.S. released Nozai in exchange for American engineer Mark Francis. At the same time, he mentioned that other detained Afghans should also be released, and related efforts, he said, are underway. Nozai is considered a key associate to the founder of Taliban, Mullah Omar. Being accused of drug smuggling, he was arrested in New York 17 years ago and then was sentenced to death by a U.S. court. As a Navy veteran and an engineer, of course, the American who was exchanged with him, Frank Rich, went to Afghanistan multiple times since 2012, and he was detained by Taliban in February of 2020. And still to come on the program. Is calling it a significant step, as Turkish president says he is hopeful of the end to the war in Ukraine. Welcome back. Italians will soon vote in national elections, and the country will have its 70th government since the founding of the Republic in 1946. Recent polling on voting intentions point to a significant victory for the right-wing coalition, with Meloni's party, Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, at the helm. These results could usher in the country's first female prime minister, but questions remain about how far right she will govern, how long support will last, and how she'll respond to European and international pressures.
Mario Draghi, the former head of the European Central Bank, will step down as Italian Prime Minister once a government is formed after the early general election on September the 25th. Draghi was unelected and led a broad coalition government for almost 18 months until it collapsed in July when a number of parties withdrew their support. Draghi then handed in his resignation to President Sergio Mattarella, who asked him to stay on in a caretaker capacity. The political crisis upended months of stability in Italy, during which Draghi had helped shape Europe's tough response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and had boosted the country's standing in financial markets. In the thick of yet another Italian election campaign is Silvio Berlusconi, shrugging off old age, ill health, sex scandals, and a criminal conviction as the four-time Prime Minister battles for a central role after the vote. Berlusconi, who will turn 86 4 days after the September 25 ballot, looks sure to be on the winning side, even if he is now the junior partner in the rightist alliance he used to dominate. Opinion polls give his conservative Forza Italia party around 8% of the vote. That compares with 12% for Matteo Salvini's League and 24% for Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, its two hard-right allies. On the other hand, Meloni looks set to carry most clout in a future coalition, but she will probably still need Berlusconi's support to get it off the ground, allowing him to punch above his weight in terms of policy decisions and government posts. Brothers of Italy leader Giorgia Meloni, 45, is widely expected to become Italy's first female prime minister. Sister of Italy leader Giorgia Meloni, 45, is widely expected to become Italy's first female prime minister, as polls consistently show that a rightist coalition is on course for a clear victory in the September the 25th snap election. The former far-right activist from home has energized her party, which is set to see its share of the vote leap to around 25% from only 4% at the last election in 2018. Her support for NATO and Western sanctions against Russia has helped to ease foreign concerns about her suitability for the post of Prime Minister. And while a conservative alliance of parties is widely expected to win the September 25 election, it is likely to be a bittersweet moment for Matteo Salvini, leader of Italy's right-wing League Party, who has seen his position as undisputed leader of the right usurped by Giorgia Meloni. Meloni's Nationalist Brothers of Italy party is forecast to take around 25% of the vote, while the League is seen at around 12%, down from 34% in a European Parliament election in 2019 after a series of blunders by Salvini-led support. Salvini, 49, rebuilt the party from near ruin when he took charge 9 years ago, replacing the old independence battle cries with the slogan "Italians First" and replacing chants against Rome with insults directed at Brussels. The head of Italy's centre-left Democratic Party, PD, and former Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta is heading the centre-left alliance at the September the 25th early election, but is trailing the rightist alliance in the polls. Letta is the 9th leader of the PD, which he helped to found in 2013. He returned to frontline politics in March last year after heading a coalition in 2013 to 2014 that combined centre-left and centre-right parties, and from which he was booted out of office by party rival Matteo Renzi. In this election, they are focusing on battling climate change, defending civil rights, amongst others. Italy is set to vote on September the 25th in a national election where Italians will vote for a slimmed-down parliament. 400 seats in the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, and 200 in the Senate of the Republic. Candidates can compete in parties or coalitions, and voters need to give one vote each for the Chamber and the Senate. In the current electoral system, 37% of the seats will be allocated based on the first-past-the-post principle, meaning that whoever gets more votes wins the seat.
Now to some updates on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he believes Russia's leader is seeking an end to the war he began in Ukraine and that a significant step will be made. He says his impression from recent talks with Vladimir Putin was that he wanted to end this as soon as possible. Ukraine has recaptured swaths of its territory this month. In an interview with US broadcaster PBS, the Turkish leader indicated things were quite problematic for Russia. Mr. Erdogan spoke of having very extensive discussions with Mr. Putin at a summit in Uzbekistan last week. The Turkish leader said he gained the impression that the Russian president wanted a speedy end to the war. Meanwhile, Leonid Slutsky, the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, has told the lower house of Russia's parliament that a decision on holding referendums in Ukraine's pro-Russian Donbas regions on joining Russia should be taken within days or even hours. Denis Pushlin, head of Russia-backed separatist Donetsk region of Ukraine, had earlier called on his fellow separatist leader in neighboring Luhansk province to join forces in preparing for the much-anticipated referendum on joining Russia. In a video posted on social media Monday evening, he was said to be shown talking on the phone with the leader of the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic, Leonid Pashinik. Well, staying with the referendums, Russian-installed officials in the Kherson region of Ukraine said they have decided to hold a referendum on joining Russia and have urged the Kremlin to give its permission as soon as possible. Vladimir Saldo, the Russian-appointed head of Kherson, says he hopes Kherson will become a part of Russia, a fully fledged subject of a united country. Russian forces control around 95% of Ukraine's Kherson territory in the south of the country. Saldo did not name a date for the proposed vote. Officials in parts of Ukraine controlled by Russian forces, including the two breakaway Russian-backed regions of the Donbas, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, have stepped up preparations for long-discussed votes to join Russia this week in a coordinated move. Joining us for more on the latest is Mr. John Essen. He is a lawyer and counterterrorism expert. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Oh.
Earlier this month, Mr. Erdogan, that's Turkey's president, accused the West of adopting a policy of provocation, he called it, towards Russia, warning that the war was unlikely to end anytime soon, was what he actually used. And today, he's saying something different. Russia's leader is seeking an end to the war he began in Ukraine, and that we will see a significant step. What's your reading of these comments coming at this time?
Well, Erdogan is right about the war not ending soon, because that is not going to end soon. But several months ago,
that was what he said several. Yes, that's what he said several months ago. But it appears to be shifting ground now.
Yeah, he's only shifting ground because Russia is in trouble. And in the state that Ukraine is now, there is no way they're going to negotiate, because when you're riding on a tailwind and you have such momentum and there are windows of opportunity for you to advance, and this is all you've been wanting to do for months, you cannot concede that all that ground just to negotiate. The only reason Ukraine will negotiate with Russia, is if Russia is prepared to withdraw all of its troops from all of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea and the Donbas and and the Donbass region that includes Luhansk and Donetsk. And I don't see Russia doing that. So this is not going to end on a bargaining table. It's going to end in the battlefield. I don't see this ending with any negotiation.
In terms of what you've mentioned, you're saying Russia is in trouble. Turkey's president said things are quite problematic. We know that last week, a Russian leader said he was open to meeting the Ukrainian president, but Mr. Zelensky was not. He told India's prime minister that he wanted to end the fighting as soon as possible. But today, we're also reading from Russia saying that, you know, they actually have weapons to continue the fight for this war. How far do you think Ukraine is making in terms of the grounds that it is getting so far in terms of the war? Because some people say that, you know, what might be happening is just a bit of a propaganda. Russia still has the upper hand, and perhaps Ukraine is trying to meet up.
Russia knows it doesn't have the upper hand, and all it's trying to do now is divert attention from the disaster in Kharkiv. It was completely blindsided by what happened in Kharkiv, and it's just trying to divert attention. It's completely surprised by what Ukraine did, and what Ukraine intends to do now is push until the winter sets in, because it has momentum now. And what Russia ought to be doing, if it has any chance to win this war, is for Putin to order for a universal conscription, because his forces are stretched. That's why he lost in Kharkiv. The forces were so stretched that when the Ukrainians burst open the front line in Balakia, behind it was just a shell. There was nothing there, because the forces are so stretched. There was no reinforcement. There were no reinforcements to hold the Ukrainians back. So what he should be doing is to look for where he's going to get soldiers, you know, to support his cause. But he can't do that because of the political consequences, the ramifications of doing that. Most of the soldiers fighting for the Russians are ethnic minorities who come from the fringes of the Russian state. They are not Slavs. They are not actual, real Russian proper. And the real Russians, who are the middle class in places like St. Petersburg and Moscow, are not prepared to fight. It's not their fight. I mean, they're supporting Putin as long as it doesn't involve them. But once he calls for that conscription, then he's going, you know, all hell will break loose. And he knows why he's not doing that.
What would you call those who are at the Donbass region, who are calling for a referendum, joining Russia as quickly as possible?
I don't know what percentage of the people you're referring to are joining Russia, but if there are any Ukrainians in the Donbass region, which is Russian control, who would want to remain with Ukraine, you wouldn't hear their voices because they'll be shut down anyway. Any dissent in that region will be shut down because it's controlled by Russia. Anything you're going to hear will be a Russian narrative, and I think that's what's happening.
And that's also what we're hearing from Kherson. And meanwhile, at one point in time, we thought Ukraine was going to take back Kherson, but then Russia still has about 95% control of the city.
Yeah, the Ukrainians are fighting on two fronts at the moment. And even in Kherson, they have momentum, but that's a war of attrition. So it's grinding, it's slow. The gains are incremental. It's nowhere near what happened in Kharkiv. Kharkiv was a different strategy, and it produced different results. And the reason that even making inroads in Kherson was because Ukraine was able to talk Russia into thinking that the counteroffensive was actually, the campaign for the counteroffensive was actually going to be in Kherson in the south, but they were targeting the northeast in Kharkiv. And the Russians have been withdrawing troops from Kherson to Kharkiv to be able to, you know, to support their campaign in Kharkiv, which is why they lost. So the Ukrainians are making inroads in Kherson as well, but not as much as Kharkiv. This war is going to take it. We are talking years here, not months, maybe even decades. This is going to go on for a very long time, and eventually, because Russia is losing ground now, and I don't see them winning this one. You know, because the strategies that Ukraine have started deploying now is a comprehensive combat part of the strategy. They have just, you know, integrated everything good about warfare into one, and that was what was demonstrated in Kharkiv. And if they carry on that way, then they'll eventually win this war. The only way Ukraine can lose this war if it loses the support of the West, because even their soldiers are being trained in the UK and in the US, because for months Russia had been targeting their training facilities in Ukraine, so they don't train in Ukraine anymore. So the training you saw demonstrated in Kharkiv, and of course the weapons, the lethal support, they're all getting from the West. The intelligence that they used to be able to do what they did in Kharkiv, which is fairly staggering, and it's an inflection point, is from the West as well. So the only way they can lose this is if the West withdraws its support.
Well, we will continue to follow the latest on the front lines. We'd like to thank you for joining us, lawyer and also counterterrorism expert, Mr. John Essing. Always a pleasure having you join us on the program.
Thank you for having me, Millicent. Bye-bye.
Still ahead. The late Queen Elizabeth and former Prime Minister Abe received Global Citizen Award, which also honors leaders of Finland and Sweden. We'll tell you more when we return. And to stories on the environment, a powerful earthquake has rocked Mexico's western coast. On the same day, the country marked the anniversaries of two devastating quakes, which killed thousands of people. The 7.6 magnitude quake hit the coastal states of Michoacán and Colima on Monday. So far, one person is known to have been killed, but late last night, U.S. officials issued a tsunami warning for parts of Mexico's western coastline. Here's more in this report.
Power lines shook, parked cars moved, a dental office rattled, and residents of Mexico City rushed outdoors as a seismic alarm went off, warning of a powerful earthquake that struck the country's west coast. Officials say the 7.6 magnitude quake killed at least one person, damaging buildings and knocking out power in some areas close to the epicenter. And it all happened on September 19th, the same day that major quakes battered the country in 1985 and in 2017, killing thousands of people altogether.
In scientific terms, there's nothing to say that September 19 is a special day for earthquakes. In fact, there have been 3 earthquakes in the city on this day. Of course, there are questions from the people, and we all ask ourselves this question: why does it tremble on this date? But nothing scientific tells us that September 19 has any special consideration.
This Reuters video journalist, Anna Portela, said she had just finished an earthquake drill held annually on this day, only to get a warning some 30 minutes later to evacuate for real. She films the ordeal on her phone.
And at that moment, I started to feel dizzy. I thought something was going on. The feeling was familiar to me because it wasn't the first time I felt this way when an earthquake takes place in Mexico City. So I rushed out on the street. I heard the alarm. I already saw my neighbors gathered outside.
According to other witnesses, many were shocked at the possibility of an earthquake happening just an hour after the drill. Accountant Ricardo Benitez says he was one of the first ones out of his building.
A colleague quickly warned us. We were the first ones to evacuate, and I didn't feel it. Other colleagues felt it. One, who was on the toilet, said the doors were shaking.
Many stood cradling pets on the streets of Mexico City. Others clutched their phones, sending text messages or waiting for calls to go through. One woman said she was thankful she was prepared. Some areas in Mexico were still on high alert as at late Monday, a tsunami warning was issued for parts of Mexico's coast, with officials saying waves could reach 3 to 9 feet above the tide level.
Meanwhile, September to November is hurricane season for the U.S. and the Caribbean. The U.S. has responded with emergency aid to Puerto Rico as the island was hit hard on Sunday and Monday by Hurricane Fiona. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird has more.
U.S. President Joe Biden has approved an emergency declaration for Puerto Rico's Hurricane Fiona as the hurricane made landfall on Sunday and caused catastrophic winds and flooding to the island. President Biden assured Puerto Rico's governor that the federal team, most notably the Federal Emergency Management Administrator, Dion Criswell, remains on the job to get it done, especially since Puerto Rico is still recovering from the damage of Hurricane Maria.
So we'll continue to be on the ground. It's too early to tell what the recovery will look like, but what I can say is we will stand hand in hand with our partners in the Commonwealth to ensure that the island recovers as quickly as possible.
The residents of Puerto Rico learned from Hurricane Maria and made preparations to ensure safety during the hurricane.
I think we have learned a lot from the last time. We didn't prepare because we thought nothing bad would happen, and look what happened.
Hurricane Fiona left the island without power, flooding and causing major damage. But it's anticipated that power will be restored in just a few days. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channels Television News.
And staying with extreme weather events, over 1,460 health facilities have been affected by the most severe flooding in Pakistan's recent history. With access to healthcare facilities, healthcare workers, essential medicines, medical supplies limited by widespread damage to roads and other critical infrastructure. Flooding in the town of Bahrain in the Swat Valley has seen entire buildings washed away, homes destroyed and roads left in ruin. Staff at the civil hospital in Bahrain, one of the few remaining health facilities in the region, say they have been under immense pressure with limited supplies and resources to provide medical care. Outbreaks of acute diarrhea, typhoid, measles and polio are worsening, and increased transmission of insect-borne diseases like malaria, dengue fever remain a threat. The death toll in Pakistan from the season's monsoon rains and floods since mid-June has risen to around 1,559, along with over 12,000 injured.
Challenges are basically arising just because of the destruction of the roads, because they cannot travel so long from their Kalam to this area. This is, I think, the only health faculty left here. So it's difficult for them to travel too long to be here.
Since beginning, WHO staff is on the ground. We visiting all the districts which have been affected and supporting with supply of medicines and other logistics, supply with rapid diagnostics to enhance the disease prevention and control when it comes to certain vector-borne and waterborne diseases. And also WHO staff was much involved with organizing mobile health camps.
Meanwhile, rescue workers in Japan have warned of mudslides and flooding after one of the biggest storms in recent decades battered the country. Typhoon Nanmadol killed at least 4 people and injured more than 100 others after making landfall on the southern island of Kyushu Monday morning. 150,000 homes are still without electricity. The storm has now been downgraded to a cyclone after moving across much of the country and heading out to sea. The super typhoon brought gusts of up to 234 kilometers per hour, destroying homes, disrupting transport and businesses. It's equivalent to a Category 4 or 5 hurricane. And to other stories now. United Nations Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed has hailed China's achievements in poverty alleviation as amazing, saying other countries around the world could learn lessons from China's practices. Mrs. Mohammed, also chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group, made the remarks when asked if China's model of extreme poverty eradication can be replicated in other countries, especially those that have suffered most from the pandemic, geopolitics, inflation, and are trying to get their people out of poverty.
It's amazing what China was able to do because that's actually how the goal for poverty on the MDGs was achieved, was the efforts that came out of China. I think China has many examples of how this could work. Not every country would be able to achieve those goals in the same way. So I think there are lessons learned, and many could gain from that. And I think what the UN tries to do is to share those best practices around the world, around the framing of what we've got to get done as goal number 1 of the SDGs. So yes, lessons learned, and in particular, what were those key ingredients to taking people out of poverty? Education was one. Putting a square, nutritious meal on the table was another. There are things that we can all do, and that were examples of what helped China pull people out of poverty. And I think the biggest lesson we have to learn is how you did it at scale. And that's the big one. It's not to do a few people, it's to do everyone above the poverty line and giving them an opportunity.
Finally on the programme, the leaders of Finland and Sweden have been awarded a Global Citizen Award handed out by the Atlantic Council in New York City. They were both recognised for their country's historic decision to join NATO following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Other recipients included the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, Google and Alphabet CEO, Sundar Pichai, as well as Academy Award-winning actor and humanitarian Forrest Whitaker. This year's event also featured tributes to the late Queen, Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, and Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister of Japan and 2016 Global Citizen Award recipient.
Yes, Europe needs the US, but the US also needs Europe. And the world grows more and more insecure and divided. It is imperative that we come even closer together. To paraphrase President Kennedy, we intend to not only ask what NATO can do for us, but what we can do for NATO.
For Sweden, Russia's aggression against a sovereign and democratic neighbor was a watershed moment. Our decision to apply for NATO membership marks the end of more than 200 years of neutrality and non-alignment. And my message is this: you can count on us. Sweden and Finland will continue to be your friends and partners, and once the ratification process is complete, also committed allies.
Her Majesty the Queen was the finest example of distinguished global citizenship. Her dedication to duty, her unfailing effort to reach out to all sectors of society, whether it's Britain, the Commonwealth, and the rest of the world, really give us the finest example of how each of us can contribute to global harmony, success, and prosperity. And she has done it for 70 years with great humility, common sense, and the highest degree of integrity. I suggest to all of us that we should follow Her Majesty's fine example, and we should remember all her wonderful work and achievements fondly in the many years to come.
Hearty congratulations to all the winners. And that's our lineup today. Thank you for watching. I'm Melissa Ntorwaka. Goodbye for now.